A single act of kindness at a diner changes the life of a struggling waitress, teaches a billionaire the true value of compassion. The father was a man used to control and wealth. Every decision he made, from the smallest to the largest, was measured and calculated. Money had always been his way of solving problems, and his life was filled with luxury cars, private jets, and mansions. But he carried a quiet emptiness inside him that not even the finest things could fill. His adult son, who had been born with a disability, was the most important person in his life, but the father often struggled to know how to connect with him. Despite all his money, he felt helpless in moments when his son needed patience, care, or understanding. On this particular day, he decided to take his son out to a diner, one of the few places quiet enough to avoid the stares and whispers that followed them almost everywhere. It was a simple place with checkered floors, a few wooden tables, and sunlight streaming through dusty windows. The kind of place that seemed far away from the city's busy streets and the high walls of wealth he was used to. He wanted something different today, a space where his son could sit comfortably without the burden of being judged. As they entered, people glanced at them briefly, but no one lingered. The father felt the usual mix of relief and discomfort. He had grown accustomed to people staring at his son's wheelchair, the way he held himself, and the way he needed help with daily things that many took for granted. It was a mix of pride and protectiveness that made him watch carefully, always prepared to step in and shield his son from awkward attention. He chose a booth in the corner, the farthest from the entrance. From there, he could see everything in the small diner, observe how the staff moved, and notice how other customers reacted. He had always been aware that people sometimes treated his son with either pity or avoidance, and he wanted to see if this place would be different. He watched his son fidget with the napkin and utensils, noticing the small moments that required help, the kind of details that usually went unnoticed by strangers. A waitress approached with a warm smile, her eyes kind and patient. She didn't seem nervous or unsure. The father watched her carefully, as he always did, measuring how people responded to his son. There was something in the way she spoke softly, crouched slightly to meet his son's gaze, and handed him the menu that caught his attention. Unlike other servers who might have rushed away or looked uncomfortable, she seemed genuinely present. The father had never been very comfortable, showing vulnerability or expressing emotion in public. Yet, sitting there in that quiet corner, watching his son interact with the waitress, he felt something stir inside him, something he couldn't name. It wasn't just gratitude. It was a mix of relief, hope, and a small sense of awe. He realized that this simple act of engagement, which cost nothing but patience and kindness, was something rare in the world he usually navigated. His son, usually quiet and reserved in public, seemed to relax slightly. The tension in his shoulders eased, and he allowed the waitress to talk to him and explain the menu in a calm, gentle voice. The father noticed every little smile, every small attempt by the waitress to include his son in the conversation, and it felt like a small miracle in the ordinary flow of life. He felt pride, yes, but also a pang of shame that he himself had often been too busy or distracted to give such moments of attention. The father sipped his coffee quietly, allowing the scene to unfold without interference. He was used to being the one in control, the one making decisions and giving orders, but here he felt a rare sense of humility. It was strange, unsettling even, to realize that someone so ordinary, someone with no wealth or power, could demonstrate such extraordinary humanity. He couldn't help but think about how many people had crossed paths with his son before, ignoring him or treating him awkwardly, and how different life could feel when someone simply cared, as he observed. He began to reflect on his own behavior, his own interactions with people outside his circle of influence. He realized that his wealth had often created a barrier, both for others and for himself. It had shielded him from small, authentic human connections. And yet here was someone who didn't need to look past any of that. She saw his son, not his father's wealth, not the privilege or the status, just the person sitting before her. That was something money could never buy, something that required no grand gesture, only patience and empathy. Minutes passed, and the father remained silent, but inside he was processing everything. He noticed the subtle changes in his son's demeanor. It's a slight relaxation in his hands, the way his eyes followed the waitress with interest rather than distraction. It was a quiet, ordinary moment, yet it carried extraordinary weight for him. For once he felt that the world wasn't entirely cold or indifferent. That genuine kindness still existed in places he had overlooked. In that corner booth, surrounded by the hum of conversation, the clatter of dishes, and the warm sunlight filtering through the windows, the father realized something important. Life wasn't measured by wealth, cars, or mansions. It was measured by the small acts of care and attention, by the moments when someone saw another person fully, without judgment or expectation. That realization began to settle deep inside him, planting the seeds of a change he hadn't anticipated but would carry forward in the days to come. For the first time in a long while, he felt both grateful and humbled. Grateful that someone could show his son the attention he deserved, and humbled because it made him confront his own shortcomings. The waitress's simple act of kindness, something he might have overlooked in a different setting, was quietly shifting his perspective, teaching him a lesson in patience, empathy, and the real meaning of human connection. And in that ordinary diner, the father began to see that sometimes the smallest gestures could carry the greatest impact, not just for his son, but for himself as well. The waitress had been working at the diner for a few years, but she had never encountered a situation quite like this before. She was used to busy lunch crowds, orders piling up, and people who barely noticed anyone except themselves. But when she approached the table where the billionaire's son sat, she immediately noticed the way he struggled with his fork, the way his hands trembled slightly, and the small frown that creased his forehead. She didn't hesitate or look away. Instead, she smiled softly, leaned down just a little so she could meet his eyes, and spoke in a gentle, steady voice that immediately seemed to calm him. "Would you like me to help you with this?" she asked, her tone warm but not pitying. She didn't rush him or speak as though he were helpless. She spoke as though he were capable, just needing a little support. The boy's eyes widened slightly, and after a moment of hesitation, he nodded. His father watched silently, his usual detachment replaced by quiet curiosity. He had seen people react to his son with awkwardness, impatience, or even discomfort, but never with such immediate kindness and calm. The waitress carefully took his fork and began to assist him, guiding his hand gently as he ate. She made soft conversation, asking about the food, joking lightly about the diner's menu, and keeping her tone natural and engaging. She didn't make him feel different or strange. She treated him like anyone else, giving him dignity while helping him complete the task he found difficult. Each bite she helped him with was done slowly, deliberately, and with patience. There was no rush, no sense of obligation, only a genuine effort to make him comfortable. The father's eyes followed every movement. He noticed the way his son's shoulders relaxed as he ate, how the tension in his face eased, and how a small smile appeared, almost hidden at the corner of his lips. It was subtle, but to a father who spent years watching his son struggle, it was monumental. He felt something he had rarely felt in public before: relief. Relief that someone, a complete stranger, could see his son for who he was and respond with pure kindness. As she continued, the father observed the nuances that made her care so real. She adjusted the napkin under his chin without asking, anticipating small discomforts. She laughed gently at his jokes, even when they were simple or repeated. And she never looked around for help or glanced at her watch. Every gesture was natural, and every moment showed an instinctive understanding of how to make someone feel safe and valued. The father's mind began to wander to the countless times he had hired private nurses or aides for his son, expecting professionalism and efficiency, but rarely encountering true warmth. He realized that no amount of training or money could replace the human touch, the empathy that came naturally to someone like this waitress. It wasn't just about feeding his son. It was about seeing him as a person with feelings, needs, and a personality that deserved attention. Meanwhile, the waitress continued to converse lightly with his son. She asked him about his favorite foods, his hobbies, and gently encouraged him to try a bite on his own when she saw he was capable. He responded with small nods and occasional words, slowly gaining confidence with her guidance. The father noticed how she celebrated each tiny success, her encouragement never patronizing, but always supportive. It was clear she found joy in helping, not obligation. The diner around them carried on as usual, with the background noise of plates clattering, conversation buzzing, and the smell of coffee and fried food filling the air. Yet, in that small corner booth, a quiet bubble of care and attention formed. The father was struck by how ordinary the scene looked, yet how extraordinary it felt to witness it. It was a reminder that true acts of kindness often happened in mundane places. In everyday moments that might go unnoticed by the wider world, he also noticed a subtle change in his son's demeanor. Usually shy and hesitant in public, the boy's eyes sparkled with curiosity. He leaned slightly forward, engaging with the waitress and even laughing softly at her jokes. For a moment, the father felt a mix of pride and wonder. Amazed at how someone else's simple actions could unlock such joy in his son, it was a level of connection that money could never buy and influence could never manufacture. The father's thoughts drifted further, realizing how often he had overlooked these small human interactions in his own life, surrounded by wealth, influence, and constant control. He had rarely stopped to observe how much impact a simple, patient act could have. Here, in this quiet diner, a single person with nothing but time and compassion was changing the day, and perhaps the life of his son. He also began to see the waitress not just as a helper, but as a person with her own struggles. There was a quiet determination in her movements, a subtle strength in how she balanced multiple tasks with grace. He imagined the effort it must take to work long hours, deal with difficult customers, and still carry herself with such patience. He felt a new kind of respect, one that went beyond wealth or status. This was a person whose value could not be measured in money, yet whose impact was profound. Minutes turned into what felt like hours as the father silently observed. The waitress finished helping his son with his meal, and he leaned back with a satisfied expression, the tension in his body gone. She smiled at him warmly, patted his hand lightly, and excused herself politely to attend to other tables. The father's heart felt unusually full, a mix of gratitude, admiration, a subtle self-awareness that he had not experienced in years. For the first time, he truly understood the power of human kindness. It was not flashy, not loud, and it certainly could not be bought. It was quiet, deliberate, and transformative. Watching the waitress feed his son, engage with him, and treat him with dignity opened something inside the father. He began to question how often he had prioritized convenience or appearances over genuine care, and how much he had underestimated the impact of small, sincere gestures. By the time the meal ended, the father felt a shift within himself. The act he had witnessed was small in the grand scheme of the world, but monumental in his own life. He realized that sometimes the simplest acts of empathy could teach the greatest lessons. That day, a young waitress had unknowingly shown him what it meant to truly see someone, to connect with them on a human level, and to offer care without expectation. He left the diner with his son, a quiet resolve forming inside him. He didn't yet know what he would do about it, but he knew that this moment had changed something fundamental in him. He had watched kindness in action, and it had stirred a desire to do more than just observe, to participate, to act, to bring the same sense of dignity and care into the life of someone who deserved it. And as they walked out into the sunlight, he carried with him a simple but powerful truth, that even in the ordinary moments, the extraordinary could happen when someone chose to care. The father could not stop thinking about the waitress. Her small act of kindness had stayed with him long after he and his son had left the diner. He replayed the scene over and over in his mind, noticing new details each time: the gentle way she encouraged his son, the patience in her eyes, the subtle respect she gave without hesitation or judgment. He had watched her help someone in a situation that many people would find uncomfortable, yet she had done it effortlessly. That single moment had left a mark on him, one that would not fade with time. He began to wonder about her life outside the diner. What kind of person would treat a stranger with such care, especially someone society might overlook? Wealth and privilege had given him many comforts, but they had rarely allowed him the chance to witness such genuine empathy. He realized that, while he could hire people to care for his son, he had rarely seen someone act out of pure kindness without expecting payment or recognition. This waitress had done just that. The father quietly started paying more attention to her each time he visited the diner. He noticed how she balanced the demands of her job, carrying trays heavy with plates, while still smiling at customers and helping anyone who needed it. She worked tirelessly, yet never complained. There was a quiet dignity in the way she moved and spoke, a strength that was easy to overlook but impossible to ignore once observed. The father felt both admiration and a growing sense of responsibility. He wanted to understand more about her, not as a wealthy man trying to intervene, but as someone genuinely curious about the life she led. He began discreetly asking the diner staff about her. They told him she worked long hours, often picking up extra shifts to support her family. They mentioned that she had once dreamed of becoming a nurse, but circumstances had forced her to abandon that path. The father felt a mix of respect and surprise. Here was someone who had sacrificed personal dreams to take care of others, a woman whose life was filled with challenges most could not imagine. Yet despite the hardships, she carried herself with unwavering kindness. Treating every person she encountered with care and respect, the father reflected on the contrast between his world and hers. His life was one of endless opportunity where money could solve nearly every problem. Yet she had accomplished so much through resilience, determination, and compassion, qualities that could never be bought. He realized that he had undervalued these qualities in people outside his circle of wealth, assuming that success or influence measured a person's worth. Watching her, he understood that true strength and greatness often existed in the quiet, unnoticed efforts of ordinary people. He also began thinking about his son. In the past, he had tried to provide everything his son could need, from private care to expensive therapies. But he knew now that money alone could not create the human connection his son required. The father felt a twinge of guilt, realizing that he had often prioritized efficiency over empathy. The waitress had done in a single meal what he had struggled to achieve in years. She had made his son feel seen, understood, and cared for. It was a lesson that weighed heavily on him. Challenging his assumptions about what truly mattered in life, the father decided to observe her further, not out of suspicion, but out of genuine curiosity. He noticed how she treated every customer, every colleague, and even strangers outside of work. She offered small acts of kindness wherever she could, holding a door open, listening patiently, offering a reassuring word. These were not grand gestures, but they reflected a consistency of character that impressed him deeply. Each action reinforced what he had already begun to realize, that her compassion was not situational, but a fundamental part of who she was, as days turned into weeks. The father thought more and more about how he could help her. He knew that she had dreams that had been postponed. He felt a desire to provide an opportunity that could change her life in a meaningful way. But he struggled with how to do it without making it feel like a transaction or diminishing the value of her effort. He did not want to give her charity in the traditional sense. He wanted to give her a chance to pursue her dreams, a way to honor the dedication and care she had shown to his son without undermining her independence. At the same time, he noticed how his relationship with his son was subtly changing. His son began talking more about the diner visits, about the kindness of the waitress, and about the feeling of being understood. The father realized that witnessing these interactions had helped him see his son in a new light. He had always loved him, but he had often struggled to connect on an emotional level. Observing genuine care from someone outside the family allowed him to reflect on how he could be more present, more attentive, and more empathetic himself. The father's reflections deepened when he thought about the world beyond the diner. He realized how rare it was to encounter people who acted with such selflessness and patience. In a society that often valued wealth, influence, and appearances, individuals like her were extraordinary. He understood that her actions were a form of quiet heroism, small moments of courage that required no recognition but had profound impact on those who received them. He began to see her as a symbol of what was truly important: integrity, compassion, and the willingness to help others without expectation. Eventually, the father made a decision. He would find a way to support her ambitions, to help her return to school and pursue the career she had dreamed of, without making it feel like a gift from a billionaire. He wanted her to succeed because of her own talents and dedication, not because of him. At the same time, he knew that this act would also change him. He would become more present in his son's life, applying the lessons he had learned from observing her kindness. He felt a quiet determination to live with more empathy, patience, and awareness, recognizing the profound effects small, thoughtful actions could have on others. The father also reflected on the nature of luck and opportunity. He realized that many people with talent and compassion never received the recognition or support they deserved. The waitress had persevered despite challenges that could have discouraged anyone. He wanted to ensure that her efforts and potential were acknowledged in a meaningful way, providing her with tools to fulfill her aspirations. At the same time, he recognized that the most important impact was already taking place, the way she had influenced his son, and in turn, how that moment had transformed him. In the weeks that followed, the father observed subtle changes in both his son and himself. His son's confidence grew, bolstered by the memory of being treated with respect and care. The father himself became more attentive, learning to slow down, notice the little details, and engage in moments he might have previously overlooked. He realized that the impact of kindness was not limited to the moment itself, it extended outward, affecting everyone involved in ways that were often unexpected. By the time he finally approached the idea of helping her, the father had already changed internally. He no longer saw his wealth as simply a tool for acquiring things or solving problems. Instead, he began to see it as a way to amplify positive change, to invest in people who demonstrated exceptional character and compassion. He knew that supporting her would not only help her achieve her dreams, but also honor the quiet lesson she had given him, that true impact comes from seeing others, valuing them, and providing opportunities for growth without expectation. The father also began to appreciate the ripple effect of her actions. One simple act of feeding his son had set off a chain of reflection, observation, and determination that would influence multiple lives. He realized that kindness, when genuine, could extend far beyond its immediate moment. It could inspire change, teach empathy, and shape decisions in ways that could last a lifetime. Watching her that day and reflecting on the weeks that followed, the father understood that small, unobserved actions could hold extraordinary power. Finally, he decided that he could no longer remain a passive observer. The waitress had shown him, in a simple yet profound way, what it meant to care for others without expectation. He knew that he had a responsibility not just as a father, but as a person with resources and influence to respond in kind. He would find a way to help her pursue her dreams, while also embracing the lessons of patience, empathy, and attention that she had taught him. And so quietly and deliberately, he began planning a course of action that would change both her life and his own. A choice rooted in gratitude, respect, and the recognition of true human value. The father had thought about the waitress almost constantly since the day at the diner. Her simple act of kindness toward his son had stayed in his mind, replaying in vivid detail the gentle way she guided his son's hand, the patient smile she gave, the way she treated him like a person rather than a burden. He couldn't stop thinking about her life, the long hours she worked, the sacrifices she had made, and the dreams she had put aside. The more he reflected, the more he realized that her compassion was extraordinary. It wasn't just for his son. It was who she was in every moment, in every interaction. That realization weighed heavily on him and stirred a deep desire to do something meaningful, something that could honor her kindness. He knew he could write her a check, hire tutors, or pay off her debts. But he also knew that simply giving money would not have the same impact. She had worked hard for everything she had achieved so far. She deserved an opportunity that would allow her to achieve her dreams through her own talent and effort. He wanted to provide a path forward, not just a handout. He began to imagine what her life could look like if she had the chance to return to school and pursue the career she had once dreamed of, becoming a nurse, helping others, and using her natural empathy and patience in ways that could impact countless people. the father began to plan quietly. He contacted a program that could provide educational support for adult students and arranged everything so that she could enroll without worrying about tuition, books, or other expenses. He made sure that she would have the resources she needed to succeed, but without attaching his name or status to the gift. It was important to him that she'd be able to take ownership of her success, to feel the pride that comes from hard work and dedication. He wanted her to know that someone had seen her efforts, appreciated her kindness, and wanted to create an opportunity that would allow her to flourish. But he did not want her to feel indebted to him. At the same time, he reflected on the impact of the act she had performed months ago. That small gesture, feeding his son, speaking to him with patience and dignity, had created ripples far beyond what she could have imagined. His son had gained confidence, pride, and comfort in public spaces. The father had learned lessons about empathy, patience, and human connection that no amount of money or control had ever taught him. That moment had been transformative, and he realized that the best way to honor it was to act with the same thoughtfulness and care she had shown. He also thought about timing. He wanted to approach this carefully, ensuring that it would feel natural rather than intrusive. He did not want her to feel singled out or overwhelmed by the sudden attention of someone wealthy and influential. He wanted her to feel supported, not exposed. He considered reaching out anonymously, but eventually decided that leaving it as an untraceable arrangement for the school program would allow her the freedom to accept the opportunity on her own terms. That way, she could focus on her goals without distraction or pressure. Meanwhile, he continued to observe small details of her life without interfering, out of genuine respect. He noticed how she managed her time, balancing her job, family responsibilities, and personal aspirations. He realized that she carried a weight most people would struggle to bear, yet she did it with grace, patience, and a steady sense of purpose. Every small act of kindness she offered to strangers, co-workers, or customers reinforced the understanding he had gained months ago. This was a woman whose compassion came naturally, and whose determination was extraordinary. The father also confronted his own emotions. He had spent a lifetime relying on wealth to solve problems, to create influence, and to gain respect. Yet he had come to realize that true impact could not be bought, it had to be nurtured, observed, and supported in a way that allowed others to grow. He felt a deep gratitude toward the waitress for teaching him this lesson, and a responsibility to act on it. He knew that doing nothing would feel like a wasted opportunity, not just for her, but for himself and for the lesson he had learned about humility, kindness, and human connection. He imagined her receiving the opportunity to return to school and the possibilities it could open. He pictured her walking into a classroom, confident and prepared, finally pursuing the career she had dreamed of. He imagined her helping patients, bringing the same warmth and patience she had shown his son into a broader world. Each image filled him with a quiet joy and a sense of purpose. He understood that changing her life was not about recognition or reward. It was about multiplying the kindness she had shown in a single act, creating a chain reaction that could touch many more lives than he could anticipate. The father also considered the impact on his son. He wanted his son to understand that acts of kindness have consequences, and that sometimes the most profound lessons come from watching others. By supporting the waitress, he was reinforcing the values he hoped to instill in his son: empathy, gratitude, and the importance of noticing and valuing the humanity of others. This was a lesson in action, not just in words, and it allowed the father to connect with his son on a deeper, more meaningful level than he had before. Finally, he put his plan into motion. Everything was arranged quietly, thoughtfully, and carefully. The school program was notified, the necessary materials and financial support were secured, and the process was designed so that the waitress would not need to navigate obstacles that might have previously prevented her from returning to school. The father felt a sense of satisfaction unlike any he had known. This was not about prestige or recognition. It was about correcting a small imbalance in the world, about creating an opportunity for someone who had demonstrated extraordinary empathy and resilience. As he reflected on what he had done, The father realized that he himself had changed. He was no longer the distant observer who watched life pass by, judging or controlling from afar. He had become someone willing to act, to invest in others' potential, and to bring the lessons he had learned into the real world. The waitress's small gesture had inspired not only a plan to support her dreams, but also a personal transformation. He felt more connected to his son, more aware of the importance of empathy, and more committed to noticing and nurturing the potential in the people around him. In the weeks that followed, he remained quietly involved, observing the subtle changes that unfolded. The arrangement allowed the waitress to pursue her studies without revealing the source of support. She approached her classes with renewed energy and dedication. Unaware of the full story behind the opportunity she had been given, the father watched from a distance, feeling a profound sense of fulfillment. This was the result of a simple act of human kindness, multiplied and extended in ways he could not have imagined before that day in the diner. He also noticed a deeper shift in his own life. He became more attentive to his son's needs, spending time with him in ways he had never prioritized before. He began to notice small moments of joy, patience, and connection that had been overlooked in his previous life of wealth and control. By acting on the inspiration of the waitress's kindness, he had not only changed her life but also the life of his son and, ultimately, his own. The father realized that true impact does not come from grand gestures or public displays of generosity. It comes from observing, understanding, and acting with care and intention. The choice he made to help the waitress was not about him. It's not about recognition. It was about multiplying kindness, nurturing potential, and creating real, lasting change. It was a decision rooted in humility, empathy, and the desire to honor the humanity he had witnessed in someone else, that quiet act of support. Born from reflection and observation, had ripple effects that would continue long after the initial gesture. It had strengthened his connection to his son, honored the waitress's character and resilience, and changed his own understanding of the power of compassion. The father knew that the moment at the diner had set a chain of events into motion. A reminder that a single act of kindness could change lives in ways that extended far beyond what anyone could see at the time. The weeks passed quietly, yet for the waitress, life had begun to shift in ways she could barely imagine. She continued her long hours at the diner, still caring for customers, still smiling, still offering the same gentle patience she had shown the billionaire's son months earlier. Nothing about her day-to-day life had changed outwardly, yet beneath the surface, everything was different. She had received letters and instructions from the adult education program that would allow her to return to school, pursue the nursing degree she had once put aside, and step closer to the life she had always dreamed of. She didn't know who had arranged it, and she didn't ask. She simply accepted it with gratitude and determination, believing that sometimes opportunities come quietly to those who work hard and remain patient. The father watched from a distance, careful not to draw attention to himself. He had no need for recognition, no desire to make this a public story or a spectacle. What mattered was that she had the chance to succeed, to follow her dreams, and to continue being the kind of person who could touch lives in ways he had never thought possible. He noticed subtle changes as he observed from afar. The way she walked a little taller, the way her eyes held a spark of excitement and focus, the slight shift in her conversations when she talked about classes or her studies. These small signs confirmed what he had hoped, that the opportunity he had arranged was not simply a gift, but a springboard for her potential. His son, too, had changed in small but meaningful ways. The father had made a conscious effort to be more present, to spend time observing, interacting, and truly listening. He learned to slow down, to appreciate small gestures, and to respond with patience rather than efficiency. When they returned to the diner weeks later, his son immediately recognized the waitress. He smiled broadly, reached for her hand, and spoke with confidence in a way he hadn't before. The father watched silently, feeling a deep swell of pride and gratitude. It wasn't just the opportunity for the waitress that had created this shift. It was the quiet modeling of empathy and care, showing his son how human connection works. Over time, the waitress began to thrive in her classes. She studied late into the night, balancing her work at the diner with her new academic responsibilities. There were challenges, of course-tired mornings, difficult assignments, moments of self-doubt, but she approached each one with the same determination and patience she had shown his son. Slowly, she started to believe in herself again. The dream she had buried for years began to feel possible. Each small success reinforced her confidence, and each day brought her closer to her ultimate goal. The father reflected on the process, realizing that the ripple effect of one small, genuine act of kindness could be extraordinary. By witnessing the waitress care for his son, he had not only facilitated a transformative opportunity for her, but he had also strengthened his bond with his son and rediscovered a deeper part of himself. The lesson was clear. True change often comes from observation, reflection, and careful action, rather than from grand gestures or immediate recognition. The waitress had unknowingly taught him the value of patience, empathy, and the long-term impact of small, thoughtful acts. He began to see her story as a symbol of hope and perseverance. In a world that often overlooked ordinary people doing extraordinary things quietly, she represented the idea that resilience and compassion could open doors. Even when circumstances seemed stacked against someone, her progress became a source of inspiration, reminding him that human potential is sometimes hidden in plain sight, and that giving people the chance to realize it can have far-reaching consequences. The father also began to embrace a new perspective on wealth. He had accumulated immense resources, but he had come to understand that money alone could never create meaningful human connections or teach empathy. Instead, it could be a tool to amplify the values he now deeply respected: kindness, resilience, and the willingness to see and support others. Through his quiet action, he began to wield his wealth in ways that felt purposeful, without ostentation or desire for praise. It was not about power or recognition. It was about creating opportunity and honoring character. As months went by, the father noticed the cumulative impact of his decision. The waitress grew stronger in her studies and more confident in her life. His son developed new social confidence and patience, and the father himself had evolved. He had learned to slow down, to observe without judgment, and to act thoughtfully to make a meaningful difference. The simple act of kindness that had started it all, the way she had fed his son and treated him with dignity, had transformed 3 lives in ways that were deep, personal, and lasting. One day, the father accompanied his son to the diner again. It had become a quiet ritual of sorts, a place where they could connect without pretense. The waitress noticed them, smiled warmly, and greeted them with her usual kindness. The father saw the bond between them, the way his son's confidence had grown, and the subtle acknowledgement that the waitress had become a meaningful part of their lives, even if indirectly. It was a moment of quiet satisfaction. He didn't need words of gratitude. She didn't know his role in creating her new opportunity, but the impact was undeniable. He reflected on the idea of timing and patience. Nothing had been rushed. Every action had been deliberate, every step carefully considered. By observing first, understanding deeply, and then acting thoughtfully, he had managed to make a lasting impact without disrupting the natural flow of her life. It was a lesson he carried with him, one that reinforced the importance of measured action, humility, and genuine care. In private moments, he thought about the broader lesson for life. It was not enough to simply witness kindness. One had to respond in ways that honored it. He had learned that giving people the opportunity to grow, supporting their ambitions, and providing resources without imposing expectations could be far more meaningful than any display of wealth or power. It was about creating conditions for others to succeed, then stepping back to let them flourish. The father also saw the quiet joy this had brought into his own life. He had often felt isolated by his wealth, disconnected from ordinary human experience, and unsure how to connect emotionally with his son. Through this process, he had discovered that empathy and action were the bridges to connection. Watching his son gain confidence, witnessing the waitress thrive, and knowing he had acted thoughtfully to honor human dignity gave him a sense of fulfillment that no amount of money could provide. By the end of the year, the waitress had fully settled into her studies. She remained grounded, kind, and patient, but now carried a quiet pride and renewed hope for the future. She began to envision the life she had once dreamed of, one in which she could make a tangible difference for others. While honoring her own talents and passions, the father, observing from a distance, felt immense satisfaction in knowing that a single act of recognition and support had helped set her on this path. Finally, he understood the true power of small, thoughtful acts. What had started as a simple observation in a quiet dinera, Waitress feeding his son with patience and respect, had grown into something far greater, a ripple of transformation that touched multiple lives. His son had learned confidence and trust. The waitress had gained opportunity and hope, and the father had discovered humility, empathy, and the deep satisfaction of acting with intention. In the end, life remained ordinary in its surface details, but extraordinary in its quiet moments. The diner, the meal, the gentle care of a young woman, all of it became a story of human connection, kindness, and the transformative power of thoughtful action. The father knew that the real legacy of that day was not in wealth, fame, or recognition, but in the lives quietly changed, the lessons learned, the hope created for the future. It was a reminder that even small acts of empathy, when met with understanding and thoughtful action, could change the course of life forever.